With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Tez Zayin. We left off on Daf Tez Vav, Amid Beis, 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid, as we are learning that Acher, prior to him going off, L'Tar Busra, known as Rebbe Elisha ben Avuya, who was a Yid filled with Torah, was able to go so far away externally from the Torah and from observance. The Gemara is going to begin to address how is such a thing even possible? Why is it that the Torah that a person learns, why shouldn't that Torah protect them from going so far off? And the Gemara introduces a very foundational concept known that the people in history that were filled with Torah, and yet they made many big mistakes in their lives, that's because Tina Hoisa Belibam, which means, the way the Rishonim explain, that from when they were young, there was some impurity, there was some major Shaloi Lishma that was connected to their connection to God through the Torah. Now, many people could have the Shaloi Lishma and Torah is still going to protect them to a certain degree, but the reason why certain greats, Acher, we'll see Doyeg, Achitoifel, really got far off, because there was this Tina Beliban, and we're going to suggest what that means and how that expresses itself. That's going to be some very interesting and important idea. We're going to be learning about the greatness of Rabbi Akiva, and based on what Hasidus explains, as we shared in our few introductions, that Rabbi Akiva, the reason why Allah b'shalom, v'yarad b'shalom, because there was one nekuda that he never got confused in, and that is that the MERCAVA is not God. The MERCAVA is what we called the furniture that's around God, the chariot of God. And as the Alter Rebbe used to express himself to Hashem, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Olam Haba, I want you. As long as we stay focused on God himself, and the essence of God is revealed, dafka in this world, when a Yid learns Torah and keeps mitzvahs, this is what grounds a Yid, even when they are able to go up into these ruchnistic worlds, and how amazing it must be over there, but they desire to come back because they desire to touch the atzmos of Hashem, and that is something that Rabbi Akiva shares with all of us. Now, before we come back to the sugya of Kachim, as we are, by the way, we're going to be concluding the sugya of Kachim, as we mentioned on Daf Yud Ches. We're going to go from great to much greater, from Kachim to Taras. But before we come back to Kachim, it's still going to be an esoteric shtickle of Gemara today, and we're going to be speaking about demons, Malachi Ashadas, and Bnei Adam, and certain unique characteristics to Shadim, unique characteristics to Malachi Ashadas, unique characteristics to Bnei Adam, and how each one has similarities one with the other. And here on Daf Tezayin, Amud Aleph in the bottom, we're going to learn a Mishnah, and this Mishnah is so important because, as Rashi and the Rishonim write, the first major machloikas that developed amongst the Jewish people in halacha will be the topic that we will learn today. The mitzvah, there is a mitzvah on a man or on men when they bring private karbanos, not public, they're private, with the exception of Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach. These are the exceptions. To do smicha prior to shechita, smicha means that they take both of their hands and they lean with their hands on the head of the animal with all of their might, with other nuances of, they say words of confession, if it's a sin carbon, they say words of praise, if it's a shlomim carbon. The mitzvah of smicha, the question will be, do we perform smicha when the chagiga is brought, as it should ideally be brought, on the first day of Yom Tov? B'chlal, the issue of leaning on an animal is a rabbinic prohibition connected to not riding on an animal, rabbinic prohibition. Gezeda, that while you're riding an animal, you might rip out a branch to whip the animal. And yes, ain't shvus b'migdash, but as we concluded in Eruvin, it's not a hard and fast rule. And there's going to be a question whether smicha is performed on Yom Tov or not. And again, this machloikus was a generational machloikus. We're going to, by the way, be learning about the era of the Zugais. It was after we closed the Tanach, once the era of the Nevi'im ended, which is basically the end of the Beis HaMikdash, the beginning of you can still say that the Nevi'im Achroinim were present in the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, but going into the second temple era, what slowly developed, not right away, was the era that we call the era of the zugos, of the pairs. Meaning that since a Sanhedrin has a Nasi, has the head of the Sanhedrin, and there is the position known as Av Beis Din, we're going to call Av Beis Din as the second to the Nasi. Both of them together became the leaders of the Jewish people. We had generations of Zugais, and this machloikis, whether smichas performed or not, began in the first era of the Zugais, and it went all the way through the era of the Zugais. We're going to learn a Tosfos that points out that really there were other questions in halacha that began even prior to the era of the Zugais, but those questions in halacha were resolved very quickly. There was a question, there was a vote taken in the Sanhedrin, and there you go, and you had a majority. Being that this topic, the Nasi took one side, the Av Beis Din took the other side, and it kept on going on from one generation to the other. This is considered the first great machlokes amongst the Jewish people. We're going to have some details about one of the many applications of that. One may not be moira halacha b'fnei rabbi. One is not allowed to render halachic rulings in front of their master, and how that relates to the Av Beis Din versus the Nasi. Could the Av Beis Din go against the Nasi? And as we'll see, many other amazing details. And without any further ado, Chevra, let's go to Daf Tezvav, Amid Beis, again, 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are in the middle of the second to last medium-sized lines. And the Gemara says that Shmuel, who became the teacher of Rav Yehuda da Amoira, Rav Yehuda used to be the Talmud of Rav. After Rav passed away, Shmuel went to, Rav Yehuda went to become a student of Shmuel. So Shmuel once found his master student, the Tali be'ibra de Dasha, that was leaning on the bolt of the doorway. It's very interesting that we have this so many times, this description of one Tana or an Amoira being at a doorway. Doorway is a very significant place, a sha'an. It's a place where you go from one reality to the other, from one environment to the other. And as he's leaning over there, Rav Yehuda is crying. So Amalei, so Shmuel calls out to a student, as he does many times, Shinana. Shinana either means sharp one, because Rav Yehuda was very sharp. Rav Yehuda evidently also had some sort of long teeth, or teeth that were more visible. And Shmuel used to lovingly call Rav Yehuda at times to the one. Shinana, my kobachis, why are you crying? So Amalei, to which Rav Yehuda responds, Mi zutra ma'idich sid b'chu b'drabanan, is it little that which is written regarding the sages? And here, this is behemshich to the sugya of Acher, who was so great in Torah knowledge, who went mamash from Echad to Acher. I mean, he went to the other side. He connected ultimately to a belief in some sort of duality. And this is not the only time that it happened. In spite of the fact that he was a Yid so learned, when it says in Yeshaya, Aye Soifer, where is the counter? Aye Shoikel, where are those who know how to weigh? Aye Soifer is Hamigdalim, where are the ones who know how to count the towers? This is a lament on that which was and is no longer. There are many applications to the pasuk. By the way, there's a beautiful maimed in Torah Oir explaining this maimed mamish, the pnimius of the statement, that it's not a lament. You know, it's not that after a certain period we no longer have these great people, but Adar Abad explains how even in Golos we are able to reach the madrega of Sefer Shoikel and Sefer Samigdalim, but in Karamakim. Here, this Gemara is darshaning. What does that refer to? It's lamenting the fact that great scholars went off the way. And these were people that knew how to count. So I mean, where are the counters? Counters refer knowing how to count the letters in the Torah. This is no small feat. And this is very significant. People always touch Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe. It can also mean that as a secondary interpretation. Ezra HaSofer means Ezra the counter. Like when the whole Gemara in Kedushin is speaking about, Shishim Ribi Oisis La Torah Yisrael, and we know that it's when we count them, you're going to have more or less half of that. 304 and I think 801 something. Basically a bit more than 300,000. We don't even know how to count the letters, and that's very significant. But again, these are mystical concepts. So where are the people that still know how to count? Aye Shoikel, we're the ones who know how to weigh. What part of Torah is called an act of weighing? The Kal V'Chomer, right? One of the Yud Gimel Midos. Not everyone knows how to do it properly. And it's a lament pointing out that there are very few people that really know how to count. There are very few people that know how to do shakla kalvo chaimes. The counting of the towers, there's so many ways of learning it. We're going to follow Rashi's first interpretation, being that we're learning Agadata. This is a very mystical topic. We're the ones who know how to count the towers. What does that refer to? Shohayashainin, Gimel, Meyos, halachas, people who knew, Chachamim who knew 300 halachas regarding the Migdol HaPoireach Ba'aver, regarding the tower that's floating in the air. Now, L'chaim, what is the tower that's floating in the air? Says Rashi, first interpretation. The biggest chachma in the Torah, the deepest wisdom, goes back to the wisdom of the Aleph base. It's befitting that Rabbi Akiva, the great mystic, wrote a sefer on the Aleph base. And when Moshe Rabbeinu saw him, as the Gemara tells us, what was the greatness that he saw in Rabbi Akiva? He knew the meaning of the crowns of the letters. Now let's go to the letters proper. The one letter that goes above the heaven is the Lamed. When I mean the heaven, I mean that you have to look at every letter. There's the top, the middle, and the bottom. So there are letters that go under the ground, go into the ground. I'm not talking about final letters. I'm talking about kuf, a regular letter. There's an ois that goes in the ground. Which letter goes, not a final letter, a regular letter goes into the heavens, goes above the heavens? Lamed. What is a lamed? A lamed is a chaf and a vav. Chaf is on the bottom and the vav. Now, when you write the chaf, when you place the chaf above, when you place the vav above the chaf, you have to place it leaning a little bit to the left. The yud on the top of the vav has to be facing down, which gives the impression as if it's taking off, which is really what learning is. Learning is the koyach of grabbing that which is not yet in the world. That's ultimately chachma. You're grasping that which is beyond. But there's a specific halachic way of placing the vav part of the chaf, and there are 300 explanations into that. And so there are very few people that grasp all of them. And this pasuk is lamenting that they're no longer here. Now, this is a big lament. What does that refer to? There are 300 questions that asked Doyeg and Achitoifel didn't exactly live at the same time. Ki Yadua, people who learn Nach. Doyeg was the big advisor of Shaul, and he was a master in Torah, Sarah Torah. Achitoifel was the great advisor of David. Both of them made very bad choices. And this is the lament that you have people, that they knew how to ask 300 inquiries regarding Migdal HaPoireach Ba'aver. So you would think that if someone is so immersed in Torah, that the Torah is going to protect them. We're not saying that they don't lose freedom of choice, but how can it be? You look at it, how can it be someone so great went so far away? Yet we learned in the Mishnah that Gimel Malach, there are 3 kings and there are 4 commoners that don't have a portion in the world to come. And who are the 4? And from the 4 that don't have a portion in the world to come, we know 2 of them is Doyeg and Achitoifel. So that was the lament. So Rav Yehuda was crying, if that's the case, Anan, not the heavy alone, what's going to be with us? We don't even have that much Torah knowledge. So he was overcome with the fear. That's really the meaning of Yirah Shamayim. We're connected to God. I'm afraid to lose the connection. Look at people before me. They were so connected and they were so learned. And they went off. But it bothered him. How can it be? So Amar so Shmuel tells Rav Yehuda, I want you to know, sharp one, that there is a reason. That Tina Hoisa Belibim, that from when they were little, there was a certain impurity in their hearts. Now, this doesn't mean that people like us who don't have that level of purity, that we're going to go off, God forbid. It means that when you have such a mitzvah that someone went off the way, if you want to have an insight, why didn't their Torah protect them? Because their Torah wasn't pure. Now, what does it mean impurity? So the Gemara gives a few examples. Let's go to Acher. Acher, what did we see in Acher way before he went off the way? That he was already had that potential. Zemer Yevani lepasak mipomei. He never stopped singing Goyish music. Now, it's very interesting that Rashi really quotes that which we have at the end of Masechta Soita, that Bechlal was a takana after Churban Abayis not to drink wine in melody. So Rashi actually points us to a direction which doesn't connect this issue with non-Jewish music, but it connects it with music after the Khurban, and that's a big topic in halacha. And just to go to the end of this whole topic, that we are very lenient as kiyadua, that we consider music a means to get closer to God. We're speaking about Jewish music. That in the Fruma world today, no one, I'm not talking about the 3 weeks, I'm not talking about in the Sfira days, I'm talking about generally that which we have at the end of Soita regarding music is not something that we see practiced today for whatever reason. So let's take a Pashat Zemer Yevani, and the influence that can have on a person.
It's not talking about Greek music.
So Rashi takes it away from Greek, but the other Rishonim challenge Rashi, so why would we say Greek? If it's about Zemer, let's leave it also Zemer Yevani. Greek and American music means the same thing. It means non-Jewish music.
Could be censored.
Huh?
Could be censored.
I don't think it was a censor.
What constitutes Jewish music?
Inspired Baruch by observant Jews. Not Bob Dylan, who was a Jew, I think. I don't think that's called Jewish music. I might be wrong.
You're right.
All right, right.
It's not Greek music because the Greek destroyed the temple.
So Greek, they were the cultured people. In other words, you get that, there's a certain non-holy expression of the animal soul that you find in Goyish music. And that arouses the animal within the person.
The Jews, like Bob Dylan, the Jews performing.
I'm talking about a composer. I don't think it's about who's performing, it's about who composed the melody. Let's go on by it. We're all in dire straits. That's the case, right? That Beis another thing about Acher, not the music, that whenever he stood up from the Beis HaMedrash, you know what would fall off his lap? Many heretical books. That means that when he went to the Beis Medrash to learn, he took luggage with him. He took books that you would not find on the bookshelves, and they were philosophical, heretical books. He was curious. It doesn't mean that everyone that gets curious is going to go off. It means that when you look back, you're trying to understand how can someone as great as him go off, because from the beginning there was something there. That's what he was saying. That many heretical books would fall off his lap.
Say he was too smart?
Not too smart. He was connected to certain forces that were very unholy from when he was young. We learned at the end of yesterday's shiur that Rav Meir was already older. In other words, when you have an older person, especially Dam Mashatoshev La'apikoidus, and they want to know what the other people say to have a better formulated answer, that's a whole different thing. But when a person from their young, they're learning this philosophy and that religion and trying to understand this and that and the other before they're well grounded in Yiddishkeit, that opens them up potentially to making a mistake later on. And the Rebbe used to emphasize, let me say this in the positive, that even though the Rebbe wanted from all of us to be engaged with the world, but as children, the Rebbe so much wanted chinuch al taras hakodesh, that the children have to be insulated. Adults, we're meant to be messengers, shluchim in the world. Children have to be living in a bubble of kedusha. Okay. Same type of issue. How is it possible? Based on the premise that Torah is chachmas shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there's so much godliness in the Torah, aside of the wisdom, aside of the pleasure, this is an expression of God. So how can it be that someone that's immersed in Torah, how can they go off the trails? Nimos Hagardi wasn't a Jew, but he understood the holiness of the Torah. So he bothered him. He asked Rav Meir, Kol Amar Tanach liyodas salek. He asked him, when you put wool into a dyeing vat, dying not to die as Baruch Dayanem is dying, but as to painting, tinturaria. I grew up in that, my father with his dyeing plants. So when you put something in a dyeing plant, the dye permeates all of the wool. His point was, Torah is so powerful. When we learn, that's learning like these people learned, you got to dive into it. We're not learning a topic for an hour a day. When you dive into it, shouldn't the Torah permeate you? It bothered him. And in other words, how can it be that a Yid that was immersed in learning Torah all these years, how can they go off? So Amalei Rav Meir responded, Gavaldik answer. That only when the wool is clean and pure and you put it into the dyeing vat, will it absorb the dye. If prior to you putting it into the vat, there was a real impurity, that place won't be dyed properly. The same Nekudim. If it's clean from the beginning, the wool grows on the mother. So if it's clean and pure and you put it in the vat, the Torah will permeate it. And the Torah will protect us. Salek means, I know salek means it will go up. Here it means it will fully absorb. It will be elevated because we're speaking about ruchnis. But called the second to last line, loislik, or beloshin ha-mishnah, that kol sheyirasoi koidemes lechachmasoi, chachmasoi miskayemes. That's a Torah. Torah is a godly knowledge. And we have to first make the bracha on the Torah. We have to be open to godliness and be humble and daven and then be grateful that we're still here. It's a schus because some people, things happen to them and they made a little choice and nebach. I mean, that was the end of yesterday's shiur. That at the end, everyone is coming back. At the end, the acher, it's amazing. From acher to echad is a little pintele. All you need to do, in the positive now, you have to ignite the little spark and you put it in acher and he becomes Vaiter Hashem echad. Now, Rabbi Akiva, here is the version that all of b'shalom v'yarad b'shalom. It's, by the way, when we learned yesterday at the beginning, so in our Gemara, I didn't have that expression. It just says that yatsa b'shalom. Here, that's the key. You know why he came out in peace? Because he went up b'shalom. The all of our kasavam, and on him the verse says that moshcheni, draw me, acharecha nolucha, I will go after you. Listen to appreciate this pasuk. Acharecha, that's the nekuda. We quoted in the intro, the Alter Rebbe, it's when you want the gilui of godliness, when you want the wow of godliness, you can get stuck in the MERCAVA because there's a lot more wow there than in this dark world. But if you're looking for you, if you're looking for God, what does God want? God wants me to put on tefillin, neshama beguf. My one tefillin for God is a lot more important than me having the greatest part of this experience. So you have to run after God and not after godliness or not after Gan Eden or not after all of the Giluyim. Go after the Etzem. Even Rabbi Akiva, Bikshu Malachi Asharis L'Doichafei, they were trying to push him out, and they were upset with him because the way you make Aliyah's neshama, at least the way Rashi began, is by using a divine name. And this whole idea of using a divine name, why B'chal are we going up? No, it's since we know the emes, that the mission is to be here, so why do we go up? And the answer is very important. We're going up to be inspired to come back and do a better job. And that's really the concept of Shabbos and the weekday. And then people wonder what's more important. Depends from whose perspective. From our perspective, Shabbos, if a Jew who should want to be connected to God, or you're going to feel that connection during Shabbos. But from God's perspective, the weekday. We need Shabbos to be inspired to do our job better during the weekday of bringing God in the world. But he went up using Hashem. There was some critique on Rabbi Akiva, but God said, because my Darash, Daf Tezayin, my Darash Rashi says, the words of Rashi, that mehechan haven mekayim ashchina shenisa shalei hates it shame means Ratzi without shuv becomes almost a natural thing. If anyone were to experience that proximity with this amount of revealed godliness, would be so drawn to it that you would not be able to come back. He knew to stay away. He knew that to go up with a limit. How did he know that? So Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, look at all of these psukim. It says in Parshas Zayis HaBracha that God v'asam merive voice kodesh. It means Hashem approaches merive voice with some of his many in English, it's called myriads. Rivava means tens of thousands of holy ministering angels, which means ois hu b'revava shaloi. I know there are many ways of interpreting it, but we're going to follow the Hasidic approach that the greatest ois of God is found dafke in the multitudes, in the revava. No, it's big. The further away from duality, the closer you get to God. True, in the higher worlds, there's less division. But Rabbi Akiva knew that the atzmus of Hashem and the kavanah is to bring godliness in the multitudes. These are all reasons why he appreciated why shuv for God is a lot more important than the ratzui, which is something that we desire. Rabbi Bog brings another pasuk. Dagul miravava. Dugmuhu biravava shaloi. That where do we have, so to say, where do we find his representation? How do we get closest to his likeness? Dafka when we are amongst the multitudes. Again, all of this is about that the kavana elyoina is accomplished when we are here in this world. Reish Lakish amar Hashem tzivaka yishemai adon hu batzava shaloi. Dafka when there is a tzava, we are the tzivas Hashem. That is where we become the MERCAVA. Come back over here. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yechanan loy beruach Hashem va'achar ruach rash, and Aliyah Navi says he figured loy berash Hashem va'achar rash eish loy bo'eish Hashem. In other words, Giluyim, these are all ruchniistic manifestations of God. That's not the essence of God. But after the fire, you know what he realized? Kol dumamadakam. In an environment where you have the least revealed godliness. So as far as the positive ruach, the holy eish, you don't have it. You don't have this here. That's where you're going to find the essence of God. Okay. Now, before we come back to Kachim, let's learn a little bit about demons. I mean, why not? It makes perfect sense. About demons, about angels, about people. It flows. There are 6 things said regarding demons, for which 3 of them, they are like ministering angels, and the other 3, they are like people. One Hasidic understanding of a demon, that this world, again, Hashem is one. The farther away, the more tzimtzumim, the more diversity. Ultimately, you become to the 4 elements. Eish, ruach, mayim, and afer. And what happens in this world is that each element adheres to the other elements. Even the water that we know, like the Rambam writes in the beginning, is not pure water. It's water mixed with the other. Everything that we know is a composite. It's sophisticated. In the context of being close to God, that's to the detriment. The more sophisticated, the farther one is away from simplicity. Shadim, one way of understanding a shade is each element, pure element. That's why we have in the story of Ashmedai, it was the Mayim, Saroi Shal Mayim. You'll find sometimes Shadim connected to Saroi Shal Oretz. It's pure elements. So they are removed from having any physical manifestation, because the way things appear physically is only when the 4 elements, they combine with each other. If they're not mixing with each other, if it's not chapping, then they're not going to undertake a physical form.
The fire is not what we understand as fire.
The fire that we know is not the fire that with the fight, the Yisoid Ha'esh, the Rambam writes that, is not the fire that you see. They are too ruchniistic for us to be able to see them in our physical eyes. So anyway, so Shloish Malachi Yashades, how are they like ministering angels? Yesh Lahem Kanafayim, they have wings. In Hasidus, wings means feelings for God. Love, avanira. That's what wings. So they have the capacity to feel love and awe of God. Kamalachi Yashades. Number 2, V'tasin B'soifa Olam V'atsoifa Kamalachi Yashades. They are not limited the way we are in space. A person, first of all, we cannot live in all the environments. It can be too hot, can be too cold. It takes me a lot of time to get from here to there, because I'm living in the here and in the there. The Shadim are in a higher level. So the words here, they can fly from one end of the world with one flap of their wings. They can be in any environment. And number 3, they know the future. Because the moment space doesn't limit them, they can get from here to there with one flap of their wings. It comes together, so they don't share the same time limits that we share, which also would mean they'll know the future. We're going to get back to that in a second. Now, but they know the future like ministering angels. But do ministering angels know the future? No, it means they hear information from the other side of the curtain. Now, the simple interpretation would mean they don't know the far future, they only know the immediate future. Let me share with you a quick story to give an insight as to what this means. The Baal Shem Tov used to write letters to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Gershon Kittevit. In one letter, he wrote to him that I am consoling you for the fact that you broke your leg. Rabbi Gershon gets this letter, he says, my dear brother-in-law, this time you're wrong. With all of your ruchnius dik ruach hakodesh, I didn't break my leg. A few months later, he broke his leg. And one of our Rabbeim, it's an Amaimer, this Tzemach Tzedek explains that the Baal Shem Tov was in the world of Yetzirah. In the world of Yetzirah, he already broke his leg. Till it manifested in this world, it took a couple of months.
You didn't see in the world of the Yetzirah the time?
No, that you can't see. In other words, that when you are in a higher level, it's not that you see the future. It already happened. But since what happened in the higher world didn't yet happen over here, so when you're back over here, you have some future knowledge. That's the meaning. Yes.
By saying it, didn't he cause it to manifest physically?
No, not the Baal Shem Tov. If we would say it, yeah. Okay, weiter. And in three they are like people. We're talking about demons that they eat and drink like people. They procreate like people, and then they die. Now, there are 6 items, 6 things that are said regarding human beings, in which 3 of them they are like ministering angels, and now, if we would write it for us, I think we're like a behemoth, a lot more than 3, but we're speaking about these holy people, and 3 they were like animals. Das means is that there is a link between that which they understand and that which they feel. Number 2, they walk upright like ministering angels. And as the Chassidus says, the reason why God made an animal with the head and the heart on the same level is because the head doesn't dominate the heart. When they have an instinct, they're bound to their instinct. Instinct control, is something unique, like Malachi Asharis. They walk upright. Now, it doesn't mean that Malachi Asharis have a negative instinct, but it means that the mind rules over the heart. And number 3, they converse in the holy tongue, as do the Malachi Hasharis. If you remember, we learned that Malachim, they don't speak Aramaic. Maybe they don't speak any other language. If you want to daven, you don't want them to understand, speak in Aramaic, and all of those Gemaras. But there's something powerful in speech, and there's something extraordinarily powerful speaking the holy tongue. Lashon HaKodesh. It's a language that actually creates. Lashon HaKodesh is the medium between Ruchnius and Gashmius. The last narrow line, that oichlen v'shoisen kebehema, we eat and drink like animals. Uparim v'ravin kebehema, we reproduce like animals. Umoitzim re'i kebehema, and we create waste. Now, what's amazing is, in other words, when we say that a human being, 3 like angels, 3 like animals. First of all, a neshama is greater than a malachi asharis. To make that clear. What it means that 3 like angels, like this is the yichus, it means, my friends, that our purpose, our meaning our neshama, is to take the animal soul and to elevate it. It should be like a malach. Neshama is much greater, which is why the neshama is the one that's doing it. And really, the shoyrish of our behema is the chayas hakodesh. So all we need to do is we have to remind the animal where you come from. Who was your zayda, the MERCAVA. And that elevates the behema in the person that it should become like a ministering angel. The neshama is be'enarech greater than them both. Yeah.
Can we see the demons?
Can we see the demons? So what did we learn in Brachas Davav, I think, right? We can see, there's a way to see the demons, but why would one want to see a demon? Sometimes there are demons that manifest in people, and we see plenty of demons. Depends how you look at things. But yeah, it's shaykh for a person to see Shadim, but it would overwhelm most people. So when we said B'negea, visions of the MERCAVA, that Ben Azai hates it, the Nivga, so the Gemara in the beginning of Brachas says that's one of the Amoraim followed the formula of seeing these demonic forces, and the Nivga. He became mentally unstable, and there was a tefillah that needed to be made, then he was healed.
But they do store food, they eat someone.
That's what the Gemara is saying. Yeah, they're busy.
So Malachim can see that.
I would say that some part of us sees them also, but we're so afraid of it that we just we block it out. One of what we were learning, Bava Basra, Hurmuz, Hermos, until now, that's one of the master demons that the world can't get enough of. Most expensive perfume, Hermes, go get figure. I'm saying, oh no, these are demonic forces. Right.
Was all this part of the price that started with the country at the end after the Gemara interrupted, and then it talks about.
We finished. We finished the sugya of Acher, But since we're speaking about certain metaphysical things, we went on to demons. Correct.
But that's all this from Bryce also.
Oh yeah, Tanach Rabbanan. Sure.
But
Right.
the Gemara interrupted and then it
The
continued.
Gemara interrupts always the whole time and gives a little insight, then it goes back to the Brisa. Very good. Okay, Chevre, the first medium-sized line, Freilach. Going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, the first Mishnah in Ein Darshan. Whoever gazes at the following four things, it would have been better off that he would not have come into the world. And that is Mala Maila, Mala Mata, Maila Fana, Maila Achad, with all of the many meanings. We are suggesting that that it means not to attempt to know that which is beyond time and space, because that's not something that you can know. You can only know what it's not. Yedias Hachiyuv you can't have. Bishlam Maila 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 Mata. Maila Achad, a person to understand the detriment of beyond space, to understand this attempt of going beyond time in the future. I understand it would have been better for you not to come into the world. But why would I care if you are attempting to know that which was? Big deal. It already was. It's no longer. I don't understand the question and I don't understand the answer. I'm just reading the words. So the Gemara says, I'll give you a mashal, a mashal of a king, a human king, that told the servants, Benuli, Palatrin Gedoylin, oh, Billy's built for me these magnificent palaces, but you know where it will be built on? It's going to be built on a garbage dump. And they went and they did it. Says the Gemara, the king doesn't want for people to remember, you know what used to be here? Here used to be a garbage dump. In other words, let me use the words that we are familiar with from Hasidus. There's the Yesh Amiti, and there's the Ayin, and then you have the Yesh Nivra. So we say that creation is Yesh Ma'ayin, but the word Ayin doesn't sound so positive. Something from nothing. What before the world was nothing. Nothing. The Ayin is not the nothing that we know. Actually, Chabad Hasidus asks the whole time, where the Yesh and God is the Ayin? Isn't that blasphemous? We're the nothing, and we are created from God. Because once you get into the ayin world and you misunderstand the ayin, it sounds like something disrespectful. Like, now there's a yesh, but you know what used to be here? A garnished. That's very disrespectful. And we don't know ayin. Ayin means whatever you know, it's not that. Godliness, not even God, godliness prior to the world is nothing that you know. Once you begin knowing it and you're calling it ayin, you're being disrespectful to it or something like that or something completely else. And let's go weiter. Now the Mishnah says, whoever doesn't heed or give honor to one's creator, koine it means one's creator, one's acquirer, right? Koine shamayim va'aretz, koine hakol, rasuloi shaloi bala olam. Koine goes on the level of atzilus, just to know. So what does that refer to? Again, very mystical things. What exactly may we not do? So Rab Abba says, don't be mistakel in a rainbow. Guys, mistakel doesn't mean to look. It means to gaze. Gazing refers to a certain mystical experience, a certain, let's say, meditation that is focused on visual. You look, so great mystics would stare at a fire and they would go into a mystical trance. That's very Jewish, very Jewish. Amongst other reasons, because a candle has a shelf life, and we don't want to go that far away in these mystical trips. So when you're using not a stone as a means of meditation, but a candle, how long will the candle last? Hour. Or whatever. Now there's a way of doing a zat trip using a keshes, and that's something you're not allowed to do. And that's because it's probably going to send you up too high. It's also limited. Doesn't matter, but people who know how to do this is taklus. The way I understand this is that if they're going to be using a rainbow, they're going to go too high up in the MERCAVA. They're going to get hurt. Rabbi Yosef Amar, it means not going up, but the opposite. What's not giving honor to our koina? You know, we have in the Choshen Mishpah part of the Torah the difference between a ganef and a gazlan. A ganef is someone who steals, but he does it in secret. A gazlan is someone who, in your face, an armed robber. So many times in Allah we have a concept that a ganef is worse than a gazlan. I'm not talking about the fear that's terrible. I'm talking about between him and God. Because a gazlan is someone who says, I fear no one, which is terrible. I don't fear God, shame on him, and I don't fear my fellow human being. A ganef is saying, I fear you, I'm hiding from you. I don't want you to catch me. From you, I'm afraid, but from God, I have no fear. So there's a concept of sinning in private, which is an indication of a person who doesn't have a covet for God. No, he says that God is not in this lowly world. So either it means going too high up in the MERCAVA and losing interest in living in this world. That's the disrespect. Or what Acher concluded is that there's a certain reality in which there is no God. There's another force here. And that can lead a person to think, as long as I'm not caught, God doesn't see what I'm doing, I'm good to go. Mistakel by keshes. How do you know that that's an issue? As it says, Kamariya keshes. This is one of the visions of the MERCAVA, as the appearance of a rainbow that is in a cloud in a rainy day. Kain mare hanoiga sovif. This is how the appearance of that brilliant light that was within the three klippas, as we had in the vision, is mara de muskvayd Hashem. Notice there's something magical about a rainbow. We make a bracha when we see a rainbow. But using the rainbow as a medium of doing histakulus in order to project your soul in a higher world is something that's going to lead you too high. Rabbi Yosef Amar, the opposite. It's all connected. Wanting to go too high is because we are negating that God is down here. That's the word. It's mamish, it's two sides, it's the same nakuda. Other people want to go that high up because they're basically saying, here it's not good. Here is great. And if it's not great, make it great. Bring God over here.
What about the rainbow and Noach and all that stuff?
What about the rainbow and Noach? The rainbow is a sign of godliness. But using the rainbow for a medium of meditation, let's word it that way, is something that's prohibited. We don't know these meditations, and so let's just read the words over here.
The rainbow is also supposed to be a bad sign.
The rainbow is not supposed, so that's the whole machloikis you have throughout. And there are more paskins that if you see a rainbow, you don't necessarily have to tell everyone, go look at the rainbow, because there is a negative side to the rainbow, but there is a positive side to the rainbow. You make a bracha. No. We don't look at it that way. We don't look at it that way. There's the whole machloikis in halacha how to view a rainbow, and the rainbow has this double message. It's not the rainbow, it's the dark cloud. The dark cloud is the helam of God. The rainbow is that even where God is not revealed, if you look good, you're going to find a rainbow. Oh, finding the rainbow in the cloud. That's sitting specifically in a concealed place. What am I saying? What is the sinner saying? I don't want my fellow to see me, but I'm not afraid of God. It's as if I'm pushing away. I'm negating God's presence even in this lowly world. As it says, from God's perspective, true, the heavens are a seat. It means there's a greater revelation in the heavens, but on the earth, at least the earth is God's footstool. God is here. And sinning, B'Seiser, is declaring that I don't believe that God's feet are here. Are you telling me that it's better, so to say, if you're sinning, you might as well sin in public? At least you, be honest, own it. No, did we not learn Chevra and Moed Katan? Or as we have in other places, V'Amar Rabbi Elyahu the elder, that im roya adam sheyitzim is gaber olav. If a person cannot contain his yitzim, at least don't make a chilul Hashem. Yelech lamakim, go to a place she'ein makir noisei, and v'gil basher chodim, get dressed in black clothing and wrap yourself in a black hat. And and do what your heart desires. But so here you see that hiding a sin is greater. And says the Gemara like Hasha, when is sinning in private worse than sinning in public? If you didn't have to sin, the matzi kof l'yitzrei, and that's always true. But and just to repeat, we learned this in Moed Katan here that Rabbeinu Hanan, we already quoted this above. We learned in the Tosfos. That doesn't mean the way it sounds like. Go hide yourself, put on a baseball cap, and God forbid, go sin. It means go into galus, and dress in a way in which a person will feel more humble. And when a person will feel more humble, they will have the power to subdue the Yetzer Hara. Okay. Who was the Meturgamane? He was the interpreter, the mouthpiece of the great Rish Lakish. Whoever steers, whoever does histakos, whoever gazes at the following three, these are physical manifestations in which there is a greater revelation of the Shekhinah, whether we are aware of it or not. will enough chaos, one's eyesight will become dimmed. Number one is being mistakel at a rainbow. Number two is being mistakel in the face of a nasi. Now, when the Rebbe would teach, that's different. Then you look at the Rebbe's face. But otherwise, to be mistakel because there's a tremendous amount of shechina there. And number three, on kohanim, when they give birchos kohanim with details. So let's go. Ba'keshes again, as it says, kamare hakeshes asher yeh ba'olam v'yoyim hagesh and humare demus kavod Hashem. Banosi, as it says regarding what Moshe told Yoshua, v'nosato mehoitcha olav. That means the hoid of Moshe was actually placed on Yehoshua. Didn't end with Yehoshua. That koyach goes on all of and every generation has a Moshe Rabbeinu, as it says in Tikkun Zohar. And they have on their face a manifestation of the Shekhinah. And regarding Kohanim, you have this nuance. Hamastakel ba Kohanim, if it is Bizman Beis Hamikdash Kayim, when they would stand on the platform and they would bench the Yidden and they would use the Shem HaMafoidish, that was the maximum place where the Shekhinah was shayda on their hands. It doesn't mean that nowadays we look at the Kohanim. Nowadays we don't look at the Kohanim. Our minig is that we pull the talis over our heads. But even worse was it Bizman Beis Hamikdash Kayim, when the Beis Hamikdash is going to stand, to be careful and not to gaze, not to be mistakel on their hands. If by mistake you saw their hands, don't worry. We're not talking about looking. We're looking about mistakel is a certain type of gazing at an item. Says the Gemara, Dorash Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Nachem, who was the maternal of Reish Lakish. Ma'idich, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Micha? Al ta'aminu v'reya. Don't trust your friend. Va'al tiftechu ba'aluf. Don't rely on the general. You know what that means? Who is one's friend? Reya and Ra, very similar. Yetzer Hara, who behaves. Don't trust your Yetzer Hara. Al Yom Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara tells a person sin, and God is the general. God will forgive, and God is forgiving. So that's one of the pituye hayetzer. You'll be forgiven. Don't allow Yetzer Hara is telling you sin. HaKadosh Baruch Hu moichel al tamin, and that's the meaning al tamin bereya. So Reya, the pshat of Reya means your friend, but really the drasha here is Ra, ve'ein Ra, Yetzer Hara, as it says in the pasuk, Yetzer Leiv Ha'adam Ra, ve'ein Aluf, who is the general HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it says, Aluf Nu'urai Ata. Oh, Shema Toimin, if a person is going to say, hold on, another Pitoy HaYetzer, sin, and God will never know. Me may it be who will testify against me. Every part of this world will testify against the person. Says the Gemara, Avnei Beisai, the stones of his home, the koiros Beisai Shaladim, and the beams that are built into the home, they will be the testimony. They will be the witnesses. As it says, Ki even mikir tizak, that a stone from the wall will shout out. The kafis and a chip from a wood, Ya'amena will testify.
That'd be next to my house.
Bulach, v'shteitan hayom yom. V'chachamim oimrim, it's not an argument, it's this and this and this and this. I'm saying the Shema says Shalom Me'iraboy. Shenemar, as it says, Mishoicheves Chikecha, from that which lies in your bosom, from that be careful regarding what comes out of your mouth. What lies in one's bosom? The neshama. No, it's aware of what we're saying. Rabzeka says, in addition, Shnei Malachi Yashodis. There are two accompanying angels that are always with Amalavan Oisoi. That's the Shalom Aleichem. Me'idem boy. Shneimar, as it says, Ki malacha v'yitzavo lach lishmarcha b'chol derechecha. So now there's a deeper insight into Shmira. Shmira doesn't only mean that if some outside force is trying to harm me or you, our malachim will protect us. The Shmira is against my own Yetzer Hara. Me knowing that the malachim are with me gives me the power to tell my Yetzer Hara, I can't do what you're telling me to do because the two malachim, you understand, they're guarding me. The guards in the opposite is in Brazil, they say that all of the guards that you pay, they're the biggest ganav. Whenever there's a geneva, in Mishnah, it came from the guard company, from the security company, from the police. Here it's Lamal Yusa. Okay. Or v'yesh oimrim, eivadav shel adam me'idem, by the limbs of man will testify against them, as it says, va'atem eidai, the Hashem va'anikel, which is amazing. This is just showing that godliness is permeated all the way down into the evadim of the person and to the beams of the house and into the stones. This is all coming back to the reason why Rabbi Akiva did not get lost in the MERCAVA is because God is everywhere. And not only is God everywhere, but our mission, and only when we fulfill our mission do we become the MERCAVA to God. Only happens when we're neshama beguf. Okay, Chavra, back into Kachim, and now we begin with what we said, which would the Rishonim say, this is the first big halachic machlokes amongst the Jewish people. So in that first era, now this era of the Zugais didn't begin with the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. Like we mentioned, the Nevi'im were still there. There was a little bit of an era where when we said that the era of the Nevi'im ended, there was a lot of pushback. And that was the beginning of the Tzedukim and the Baisusim. They couldn't swallow that you don't have any more Nevi'us. And there were exceptional people that were Nevi'im, but there wasn't anymore the era of prophecy. And there was a huge shift. The center of Yiddishkeit was around the Navi and around revelation in the temple. It's the same thing. And once that became concealed, it's only coming back really with Mashiach. So the center of Yiddishkeit became halacha. And to appreciate the challenge that we needed, that we all had to adapt to it. Imagine when the center of Yiddishkeit is, a Navi is inspiration. And all of a sudden, what's the center? Halacha. Halacha, it can be very dry. And that's a struggle, that's a challenge that went throughout. And therefore, when the Hasidic movement was born and it merged both, there was a lot of suspicion. Because prior to that, whenever there was a group of people that made the inspiration of Yiddishkeit, the core of Yiddishkeit, many times it led people off halacha. But in the beginning of this era where we were making the oral Torah, the halacha, the center, those first generations were not led by one person, they were led by two people. I'm sorry? Of course they had halacha, but the way they passed in halacha is that they had a question in halacha, they would open up a sefer Torah. Can you imagine? They would open up a sefer and they would see the answer. You go try that. They were that inspired. They were holier people. They saw the godliness in the Torah. And when godliness is revealed, oneness is revealed. The concealment of godliness by default means that we live in a world of duality. That's the meaning of the Zugais. And the koyach of Torah is that even in this lower reality, as long as we place the Torah in the center, everything goes in the right direction. Now, the first era of the Zugais were the two greats. Look at the fact that they were so great that they were not given a title, just as a rule. The later generations, right? So we have Rav without the real smicha. Normally, the Yidden that lived in Babel. Rebbe, real smicha. Rabbon, the head of the Sanhedrin. And then Godol, Mirabon. What's even greater than the title Rabbon? Shmoy. In the era of the Zugais, they didn't have titles yet, as they didn't have in the times of the Nevi'im. So it was Yosi ben Yoyezer and Yosi ben Yochanan. And I'll tell you right now, Yosi ben Yoyezer, he was the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. And Yosi ben Yochanan was the Av Bezin, was the second in command. So Yosi ben Yoyezer says, Shaloi lismoi. When the Chagiga is brought on Yom Tiv, don't do smicha. Yosi ben Yochanan Amar. So the picture that Kevin put up, aside of the many comments that I will make, but not online, is that he's only using one hand, and that's already a big mistake. So you have to use both of your hands, and you have to lean with all your might. Yosi ben Yochanan says, yes, lismach, you do smicha. Look inside Rashi. Yosi ben Yezer oimer shlo lismach b'yom tev, v'zu hi machloikes v'shoina, shehoyse b'chachme Yisrael. Frek Toisves, the first machloikes, it's late. He brings on other arguments that we had before, but those arguments were resolved quickly. There were always questions, but they came to a quick result. This was a generational machloikes. Like right now, Mishnah is keeping all of these arguments, l'shem shamayim, alive forever. You keep on learning all these. Before that, there was an argument, and they came to a solution. Here there was an argument, and then it went to the next generation. The next generation of the peers was Yeshua ben Parachia, who was the Nasi. He said, Shaloi lismaich, and the Taihu Belelli said, lismaich. The next generation, Yehuda ben Tabai Yoimer, Shaloi lismaich. Now, whether Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi or whether he was the Av Beis, then is a machlekes. We'll learn that on Amud Beis. Shimon ben Shatach says, lismaich. The next generation of Zugais, Shemaiah says, lismaich. Avtalion says, Shaloi lismaich. Now, this is another nuance of history that we should know. So most people know these names because in Pirkei Avos you have that. But then you have Hillel and Shammai. No. It was Shammai and Menachem first. And we'll see what happened something happened to Menachem. And then Menachem was replaced by Shammai. So Hillel Menachem, they never argued. You know why they didn't argue? Because Menachem agreed to Hillel. But when Menachem was out, and in this place came Shammai, that's the famous Hillel. That was the last of the Zugais, Hillel and Shammai. Shammai said, Shaloi Lismaich, and Hillel says, Lismaich. Now let me give a heads up. I know we're falling a little bit behind, but we learned this. There's a big machlokes in the Gemara, how to understand this machlokes. Option number one, option number two. Option number one is that they are debating whether smicha is needed by a chagiga. Option number two is everyone agrees that the korban chagiga needs smicha. The only question is whether you do it on Yom Tov. Why? Yeah, why not? Well, again, we said that there's a shvus not to do smicha. On the other hand, if you subscribe to the rule that takev l'smicha, shchita, that smicha has to be done right before shchita, since you have to shech the animal on Yom Tov, then you do smicha. Shammai will hold that, yeah, it needs smicha, but you could have done smicha out of Yom Tov. You don't have to do smicha right before shchita. We're going to follow this latter interpretation, that everyone agrees that smicha is needed for a chagiga, like we mentioned in the intro. Pesach, we have a chazad. Pesach, Meiser, and Bechor. These three karbanis are the private karbanis that don't need smicha. Other than these three, all karbanis yachid need smicha. The question is, now it's on Yom Tov. Do you do smicha on Yom Tov or not? It says the Mishnah, at least we turned the Amid after Zayin on the top, that our Mishnah went through these 5 generations. Hadashonim, the ones that are mentioned first, they were the Nesiim. Yosi ben Yaezer, Yeshua ben Perachia, Yeshua ben Tabai, Yehuda ben Tabai, Slicha, right? All of them. Shemaiah. The first. Now, by the way, when it comes to Hillel and Shammai, here's the paradox. So by Hillel and Menachem, Hillel is mentioned first. Then later in the last line of the Mishnah, once we introduce Shammai, we mention Shammai first. But Shammai was not the Nasi. Since Hillel is mentioned first, it didn't bother us. The reason why Shammai is mentioned first is because the majority of the majority of the first opinions was Shaloi Lismaich. You'll see there's a tremendous symmetry in the Mishnah. But our Mishnah holds that from these 5 generations against Hillel before Menachem, they were the Nesiim, and the Ushniim Lahem, and the second one mentioned, they were the Av Beis. Let's chapara in a few lines. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a brayso. Here, and not everyone agrees to what we just said. The first 3 that are mentioned in the Mishnah, which was Yehuda ben Yaezer, guys, you can look back, Yeshua ben Perachia, and Yehuda ben Tabai, who said Shaloi Lismaich, and Shnayim Mizugos Ho'achroinim Sh'amru Lismaich, who are the that Shmaya and Hillel, they were the Nesiim, and the other ones are the Avos based in. These are the words of Rab Meir. The Chachamim and our Mishnah are not aligned, and the machlokes is only regarding this. The Chachamim say Yehuda ben Tabai is the Av Beis Din. Shimon ben Shatak was the Nasi. Guys, remember this. I know we're late. We're going to have to take up from here. But again, that our Mishnah writes on the top that Horishoinim Hoyinesiim. From the peers, the first one was a Nasi. You can go back and you'll see that from that Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatak, who's mentioned first? Yehuda ben Tabai. Yehuda ben Tabai, according to our Mishnah, is the Nasi. The Chachamim say that Yehuda ben Tabai is the Av Beis Din. So when it comes to that peer, there's a historical question from these 2: who was the Nasi, who was the Av Beis Din? And now that we have this argument, we're going to begin tomorrow by quoting a Braisa. The Braisa is speaking about specific halachas regarding Edom Zoymimim. These are beautiful halachas to chazer, or to learn for the first time. And it appears from that story, we're going to figure out who does that Braisa ascribe to regarding this great Yehuda ben Tabai. Was he the Nasi or was he the Av Beis Din? And that's where we're up to, whether you can be Moed Halacha b'fnei Rabbi, and God willing, we'll have some more Kfitza Saderech and a lot more to be continued.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
On Yom Tov. When you bring it on Chol HaMoed, for sure you do smicha. When you bring, now you shouldn't bring it on Chol HaMoed, but when you bring Chagiga, ideally that's the beginning of the Masechta. We paskin like Beis Hillel. What does Beis Hillel say? That we learned that in Beitzah, that not only do you bring the Oilos Riyah, and you bring the Shalmei Chagiga, and you do smicha. That's this. But that's the big machlokes.
Why is there an issue with smicha? Because that's like a
because smicha, because by rabbinic law, one may not ride on an animal, and that includes leaning with all your might. The picture that Kavan showed of me just placing my hand on an animal is not a problem of smicha.
Two hands.
We're leaning in a way, you know what leaning means? That let's say if I'm leaning on the table, if you were to pull the table away, will I fall down or not? That's the rule. Like many people, when they daven Shemona, you're supposed to stand. Older people, they lean on their standard. Can you lean or not? That's the halachic definition. If someone were to pull it away, if you were to fall down, that's real leaning. Don't do that. If you're just supporting your hands, it doesn't matter. So the leaning was mamish all of your koyach. That's like riding. You're riding on the animal. That's something that's normally rabbinically prohibited. Question is, was it permitted in the Beis Hamikdash by the Korban?
On Yom Tov.